The snow had been falling for 6 hours by the time Mia Carter pushed through the door of the ember table, and it showed no sign of stopping. She stood in the entryway for a half-second, no longer letting the warmth of the restaurant hit her face like a wall. Her cheeks were numb. Her fingers, even inside her gloves, had gone stiff somewhere between the hospital parking lot and the car, and from the car to here. 40 yards of open air in 22-degree weather, and she'd felt every inch of it. The scrubs were what she noticed first in the mirror behind the hostess stand. Not her own face, hollow-eyed, pale. The mascara she'd put on at 7 that morning, now living somewhere under her lower lashes, but the scrubs. The dark smear across the left hip, the smaller one on her right sleeve, closer to the elbow. Both dried now, almost brownish in the warm light. She'd meant to change. She'd had a bag in her locker with a clean pair of jeans and a gray sweater she'd bought specifically for tonight, back when tonight had seemed like a real thing that would happen. But Mrs. Delgado had coded at 5:47, and by the time the team got her back and Mia had finished charting and handed off to the night shift and made it to her locker, it was already 7:20, and the reservation had been for 7, and she'd thought, just go. Just go, explain, apologize, leave if he's already left. She hadn't thought about the scrubs. The hostess, a young woman with a high ponytail and a look of careful neutrality, glanced at Mia's chest, then quickly back to her face. "Can I help you? I have a reservation. Carter. +1. Or," she stopped. "He might have checked in already. Brooks, of course." The woman's smile returned, professional and smooth. "Right this way." The restaurant was not large. The tables were set close together, and the lighting was warm, amberish, the kind that made everything look like a memory. There was a fire in the back corner, several couples, a table of 4 near the window, their faces turning as Mia passed. She felt it, the small social disruption of her own entrance. A woman in blood-stained scrubs walking through a restaurant where everyone else wore cashmere. She kept her chin level. Daniel Brooks was sitting at a table near the fireplace. He had his hands wrapped around a glass of water, and he was looking at the door. Had been looking at the door. She realized, because he saw her before she saw him, and by the time she reached the table he was already standing. Not because she was a spectacle, just standing. The way people stand when someone they've been waiting for finally arrives. He was taller than she'd expected from his profile, broader in the shoulders. He was wearing a flannel, button-down, dark blue, the sleeves rolled to the forearm. There was a small scar above his right eyebrow. He looked like someone who used his hands for a living, and he did, she knew that already, from the 3 weeks of texting that had led to tonight. Daniel Brooks, 34. Single father, mechanic. Owned a small garage on the edge of town called Clearwater Auto. He didn't look at the scrubs the way everyone else had. His eyes went to her face. "Hey," he said, "I'm so sorry." The words came out before she'd finished sitting down. "I'm 40 minutes late, and I look like I was going to change. I had a bag, but there was a patient, and Hey." His voice was quiet, not loud enough to carry. "You made it. That's what matters." She stopped. He pulled her chair out fully and waited until she sat, then settled back into his own seat like this was something entirely normal, like women in trauma scrubs walked into dinner reservations all the time, and it was fine and nothing needed to be made into a bigger thing than it was. "Are you okay?" he asked. Not "why were you late?" Not "I was starting to wonder." Not the particular, careful blankness of someone performing patience. Just, "Are you okay?" Mia looked at him across the table. The fire crackled in the corner. Outside, the snow was piling up against the window glass in soft, incremental drifts. "I had a patient," she said. We lost her for about 4 minutes. We got her back. But it was. She stopped, looked at the menu she hadn't opened. It was a hard hour. Daniel nodded. He didn't say "I'm sorry" in the way that was really just a way of moving past something. He just nodded and let it sit there, acknowledged, real. Then he picked up the menu and said, "The soup here is really good, the French onion. Do you want something hot first?" She exhaled, and didn't know until that moment how badly she'd needed to. "Yes," she said. "Please." The soup came. Then the bread. Then, slowly, incrementally, the tension in Mia's shoulders began to descend. She became aware of her own hunger. She hadn't eaten since 11, and then of the warmth in the room. And then, in a way that surprised her, of the man sitting across from her. He asked her about her work without making it sound like an interview. He asked about Mrs. Delgado, not the clinical details, but whether she was going to be okay, whether Mia had family in the waiting room she'd had to talk to. He asked about the drive from the hospital in the snow, whether her tires were good, whether she'd had the car serviced recently. That last question made her laugh for the first time all evening. "I've been meaning to. Bring it by," he said, without any sense that he was offering a favor. Just matter of fact. "I'll look at it." She watched him over the rim of her water glass. There was no performance happening. That was the thing she kept coming back to. No effort to impress, no calibration, no monitoring of how he was landing. He was just there, present in a way that felt so uncomplicated it was almost disorienting. When the check came, she reached for her wallet. He shook his head gently. "Next time," he said, "you can." Outside, the snow was coming down in thick curtains. She stood on the sidewalk, pulling on her coat, and he stood next to her, and neither of them rushed. A plow rumbled past on the main street, its orange light sweeping across the white. "I'm parked 2 blocks up," she said. "I'll walk you." They walked. The town was quiet, in the way towns go quiet in heavy snow. The sound absorbed, everything muffled, the world reduced to the small circle of streetlight you were standing in. Their boots made the same soft crunch in the new snow. At her car, she turned. "I really am sorry about tonight," she started. "Stop," he said, gently. Not harshly. "Just stop. You don't need to be sorry for doing your job. Especially not that job." She didn't know what to say to that. She'd been with her ex, Trevor, for 2 years. 2 years of you always put work first, and you were supposed to be home by 8, and the particular, grinding exhaustion of apologizing for caring about her patients. She'd internalized it so thoroughly that she'd stopped distinguishing between guilt that belonged to her and guilt that didn't. She didn't say any of that. She just looked at Daniel Brooks in the snow and thought, "Who are you?" "I'd like to see you again," he said. Simple. No performance of casualness, no hedge. She nodded. "I'd like that too." He waited until she was in the car. She watched in the rearview mirror as he walked back the way they'd come, shoulders easy, unhurried, hands in his jacket pockets. The snow closed in around him. She sat in the cold car for a moment before starting the engine. Her hands had stopped shaking. The first text came the next morning at 7:52, which was exactly when Mia was finishing her overnight notes and thinking about the drive home. "Hope you slept. You were running on empty last night." She stared at it for longer than she should have. In her experience, men either texted too fast, too eager, slightly performative, or they waited the calculated distance and it felt like a game. This was neither. It was just a sentence that had been thought of and sent. She typed back, "Just finishing up. Sleep soon. How's the garage?" His response came 20 minutes later, which meant he'd actually been doing something in between. Frozen pipe in the back bay. Very exciting morning. She laughed out loud in the break room, startling the charge nurse at the coffee machine. Over the next 3 weeks, they texted most mornings and some evenings. It wasn't constant. She was on rotating shifts, and he had a 6-year-old to get to school and a business to run, but it was consistent. That was the word she kept coming back to. Consistent. Not intense, not overwhelming, just there. Reliably there. He asked about her patients in ways that didn't feel intrusive. She told him about the regulars, the ones she'd grown attached to the 70-year-old man who came in every few months with mysterious chest tightness that turned out, on each occasion, to be anxiety, and who always brought homemade cookies for the nursing staff. He told her about the cars, about the particular satisfaction of finding the thing that was wrong and fixing it, the logic of it, how a machine told you what it needed if you knew how to listen. She'd thought about that one for a while. If you know how to listen. On a Tuesday evening, when she got off early for once, she texted, "I'm off at 6, if that's not too last minute." He replied, "Lily goes to her grandmother's on Tuesdays. I'll find somewhere decent." They had coffee at a place called the Copperhead on the main strip, small, warm. The kind of coffee shop that seemed to exist in defiance of the cold outside. He told her about growing up in rural Colorado, about his father's garage that became his garage, about the 2 years after his divorce, when things had been genuinely hard, and how he'd learned that hard and impossible were not the same thing. She told him about nursing school, about the first time someone died on her watch, a 43-year-old man named Warren who'd come in for a routine procedure, and how she'd sat in her car for an hour afterward, unable to start the engine. "What did you do?" Daniel asked. "I went back in," she said. "Eventually. Because the only option was to go back in or quit, and I didn't want to quit." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite recognition, but was somewhere between the two. "Yeah," he said. That tracks. She'd learned, across those weeks, the broad shape of his life. His daughter, Lily, was 6, had her father's dark eyes, and a personality approximately 4 times larger than her body. His ex-wife, Cassandra, lived in Denver. The arrangement was civil, if not warm. Lily spent school weeks with Daniel, school breaks with her mother, and both parents made themselves available for the other when something came up. It had taken 2 years to get to that equilibrium, he said, without drama, like it was just a fact about weather. "Do you miss it?" Mia asked. "Being married?" He considered the question genuinely, which she'd already learned was how he treated all questions. "I miss the idea I had of it," he said, "not the actual thing. The actual thing was 2 people who wanted very different lives and couldn't figure that out until it cost both of them something." Mia thought about Trevor, about the particular silence of their apartment in the last 6 months, the way they'd occupied the same space like 2 weather systems that no longer interacted. "Yeah," she said, "I understand that." She'd told him, that evening, about the 2 years with Trevor, about the way she'd slowly started reshaping herself around his expectations, working fewer doubles, turning down the charge nurse rotation, apologizing constantly for a career she'd spent a decade building. She hadn't meant to tell him all of it. It came out in pieces, and he listened to each piece without rushing her to the next one. When she finished, he didn't say anything immediately. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "He was asking you to be smaller," he said finally, "so he could feel bigger." She hadn't thought of it that way. Or maybe she had and hadn't let herself. The snow was back by the time they walked out lighter this time, just a suggestion of winter. He walked her to her car again. They stood for a moment in the small, cold space between the hood and the parking meter. "Come over sometime," he said. "If you want to. Lily would like you. You don't have to, but I think you'd like her too." Mia looked at him in the low light. "Okay," she said. There was a rhythm to it that she hadn't expected. Not the urgency or the electricity that she associated with early attraction. This was quieter, more like the gradual adjustment of something that had been slightly misaligned for a long time, finally settling into place. She noticed it first in the way she talked about work. She'd always reported on her shifts neutrally, clinically, the way you learned to describe trauma when you lived inside it every day. You had to. You developed a vocabulary that kept a certain distance between the event and the telling of it. Patient presented with, "We attempted resuscitation," Family was notified because if you didn't maintain that distance, you couldn't function, and if you couldn't function, people died. It was a professional adaptation, and she'd made it so thoroughly that it had leaked into the rest of her life. This flatness, this clinical remove. But Daniel asked about the human texture of things, not the medicine, the people. What was the patient afraid of? What was the family like? What did she say when she didn't know what to say? Whether she ate anything when she worked a double? Whether the fluorescent lights in the ER ever made her feel like she was living in a world with no natural time? No one had asked her that before. Not Trevor, who'd preferred she leave work at work, who'd found the details either distressing or tedious, depending on his mood. Not her friends, who got the funny stories or the horror stories, but not the quiet, complicated middle of it. The long shifts that were neither triumphant nor tragic, just grinding and human. She started telling him things she hadn't said out loud in years. About the night in her second year when she'd made an error in medication timing minor, caught, no harm done, and had stood in the hospital bathroom for 20 minutes afterward because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. About the patient she still thought about, 5 years on. A woman named Helen, 62, who'd been admitted alone because her children were across the country, and who'd held Mia's hand for 2 hours at the end. About the particular specific exhaustion of watching families receive bad news, which was different from being tired, which was different from grief, and which had no name she'd ever found. Daniel listened to all of it. In exchange, he told her about Lily in a way that felt neither like a sales pitch nor like a disclaimer. He told her about Lily's current obsession with the solar system. The girl had memorized all 8 planets and their moons, and was deeply offended by Pluto's reclassification, and about the parent-teacher conference, where her teacher had described her as enthusiastically social, which Daniel said was teacher code for talks constantly. Mia sent him a picture of the moon one night coming off shift. No caption. He sent back, "Lily says that's waxing gibbous. She wants credit." It made her laugh alone in her car at midnight, in a dark hospital parking lot, and the laugh felt clean. She'd started waking up less tired. She noticed this the way you notice a season changing gradually, and then, all at once. She was sleeping more. She was eating actual meals. She was arriving to shifts without the particular low-grade dread that had been following her for most of the past year. She didn't connect these things to Daniel immediately. She thought it was just the winter finally breaking, the light coming back, the body's seasonal adjustment. But one evening, she was on the phone with her friend Grace, a nurse in Denver, and Grace said, "You sound different. Good different. What's happening?" Mia considered the question. "I'm seeing someone," she said. "Since when?" "A month, maybe. A little less. What's he like?" Mia looked out her apartment window at the snow on the rooftops. She thought about the way he'd said, "You don't need to apologize for doing your job," and meant it without drama or performance. She thought about the moon text. "Steady?" she said finally. "He's just steady." Grace was quiet for a second. "Mia, that might be the best thing anyone's ever said about a person they're dating." She thought about that for a long time after she hung up. She texted Daniel, "I mentioned you to a friend." His reply came after a few minutes. "Should I be nervous?" She said it was good different. A longer pause. And then, after another minute, "For what it's worth, you've been good different for me too." She read that 3 times, standing in her kitchen in socked feet, the apartment quiet around her. Then she typed, "I want to meet Lily." She arrived on a Saturday afternoon, which Daniel said was Lily's best time of day because the morning rush of getting to Saturday itself had passed, and the energy had settled into something more workable. The house was a small ranch style on a street lined with bare-limbed aspens. There were boots on the front step, big ones and small ones, and a bird feeder hanging from the porch eave, half full. A child's drawing was visible through the front window, taped to the inside of the glass. She could see crayon mountains, a yellow sun, some indeterminate animals. Daniel opened the door before she knocked. "She's in the living room," he said. She's been asking about you since breakfast. About me? What did you tell her? That you were a nurse and you were coming for lunch, and that she needed to be a normal amount of excited and not immediately ask you all her medical questions. Mia laughed. She has medical questions? She has questions about everything. He stepped back to let her in. The living room was warm and slightly chaotic in the way of a home that was actually lived in. There were books on the coffee table, a sock on the couch that clearly belonged to no adult, and in the middle of it, sitting cross-legged on the carpet with what appeared to be an astronomy book spread open in her lap, was Lily Brooks. She looked up immediately. Dark eyes, her father's eyes, in a small face dusted with freckles. She had a gap between her front teeth and wore a purple sweatshirt with a rocket ship on it. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Mia said. "Are you the nurse?" "I am." Lily considered this for a moment. "My dad said you save people." Mia glanced at Daniel, who was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had not said exactly that but wasn't going to deny it either. "I try to," Mia said. "Do you know what to do if someone stops breathing?" Daniel started. "I do," Mia said. "Do you want to know?" Lily uncurled from the carpet with the sudden, gravity-defying movement of a child who'd decided something. "Yes," she said. "Come sit down." So, Mia sat on the floor next to her, which seemed to be where the conversation was happening, and explained, in terms a 6-year-old could understand, what CPR was and how it worked. Lily listened with the focused attention of someone taking actual notes, even though she wasn't taking actual notes, and asked 3 excellent follow-up questions about ribs. Daniel sat on the couch and watched. He had a cup of coffee in his hand that he'd forgotten to drink. When the CPR explanation concluded, Lily showed Mia her astronomy book. They looked at pictures of Jupiter's moons together while Daniel made lunch in the kitchen, appearing every few minutes in the doorway to check on the proceedings. It was during the Jupiter's moons discussion that Mia noticed Lily pressing the back of her hand against her own forehead and then looking at her hand with a slight frown, the way a child does when she suspects something but isn't entirely sure. "Does your head hurt?" Mia asked. "A little." Lily put the book down. "And I'm kinda hot." Mia touched the back of her own wrist to the child's forehead lightly. "Warm. Not alarming, but warm." "Daniel," she called. He came in, read the situation immediately, and went for the thermometer, 100.1. Low grade, nothing serious. "She was fine this morning," he said, with the particular worry of a single parent who had learned to distinguish between something and nothing, but who never quite stopped checking. "She's okay," Mia said. "This is the low end. Let's give her some kids' Tylenol and get her comfortable. She should probably rest." The afternoon shifted. The astronomy book went away. Lily settled on the couch under a blanket, slightly subdued, and Mia sat on the end of the couch while Daniel brought juice from the kitchen. The 3 of them watched a movie, something animated, colorful, involving a bear who wanted to be an astronaut, and Lily fell asleep about 40 minutes in. Mia looked down at the small, sleeping face. She felt something in her chest that she wasn't entirely prepared for. Daniel came back from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to Mia and sat in the armchair across from her, keeping his voice low. "Thank you," he said, "for not making it weird." It wasn't weird. She would have gotten that temperature checked eventually, but she hates the doctor's office. She'd have downplayed it for another 2 hours. She didn't downplay it with me. Mia wrapped her hands around the mug. "I think it's easier when it doesn't feel like an appointment." He looked at her across the sleeping child between them. The afternoon light was going pale. Outside, the aspens were still bare, the sky the color of old pewter. "She likes you," he said. "I like her." Mia looked back at Lily. "She's extraordinary." He nodded, eyes on his daughter, and Mia thought, this is what family feels like. Not the word, not the concept, the actual feeling of it. The warmth of a small room in winter and people who belong to each other. She thought, I want this. And then, almost immediately, That's exactly what scares me. The weeks that followed moved differently. She couldn't have said exactly when it changed from seeing each other to part of each other's lives, but somewhere in the middle of February, it had become both. She was at the house on Saturdays, sometimes Sundays. Lily had graduated from the nurse to Mia to, on one memorable occasion, my Mia, which she'd said in the casual, proprietary way of a child who doesn't yet know what weight a word can carry. Daniel had pretended not to hear. Mia had looked at the window. They built a snowman in the backyard on a Saturday, when the snow was exactly the right consistency, packable, cooperative, ready to be shaped. Lily had opinions about everything. The snowman needed a carrot nose and a scarf and eyes made from the black stones she'd collected from the driveway, and she needed to place all of these things herself. Mia stood back and watched, handing stones when directed. At one point, she looked up and Daniel was watching from the back porch, coffee in hand. He wasn't smiling exactly. It was quieter than a smile. It was the expression of someone watching something they'd wanted for a long time and hadn't been entirely sure they'd allowed themselves to want. She looked away first. Back to Lily, who was informing her that the snowman needed a name. "What should we call him?" Mia asked. Lily considered this with the gravity of a decision that mattered. "Gerald," she said. "Gerald? He looks like a Gerald." Mia looked at the snowman. He did, a little. "Gerald it is." Daniel came down from the porch with a second cup of coffee that turned out to be for her, and the three of them stood in the snow looking at Gerald for a moment before Lily declared him perfect and moved on to the next project, which was finding more driveway stones for reasons she had not yet disclosed. Daniel stood next to Mia. Their arms were almost touching. "She's going to be disappointed when he melts," Mia said. "She always is," Daniel said. "And then we build another one." He paused. "She asked me this morning if you could come to her school thing." "What school thing?" "They do a winter program. In March. Songs and a little play. She has a part, she's the moon." Mia felt the pull of it and the fear of it at exactly the same time. The moon. Naturally. He smiled then. "No pressure?" "I just said I'd ask." "I want to come," she said. He nodded. And that was that. But there was something she was carrying underneath all of it. A small, persistent pressure behind the sternum, not unpleasant, but not neutral either. The awareness of what was accumulating, the weight of what she stood to lose. She found herself, sometimes, doing the math. Not intentionally, it surfaced unbidden in the quiet moments. If she worked a double on a Saturday and couldn't make it to the house, if the head nurse position changed her hours enough that Sundays were no longer consistent, if Lily got used to her presence and she then became unreliable not through malice, just through the grinding, unavoidable arithmetic of a demanding job. What happened to a 6-year-old who'd learned to expect her? She knew, clinically, that this was anticipatory anxiety. She'd seen it in patients. The mind building elaborate disaster scenarios in order to feel like it was doing something productive. The illusion of control through catastrophizing, knowing it didn't stop it. She'd been sitting at Daniel's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, helping Lily sound out words in a library book while Daniel worked in the garage, and she'd looked at the child's small, bent head, the crown of dark hair, the freckles across the nose, the way her finger traced each letter with total commitment, and felt something so large and tender it had almost frightened her. This is the thing I could break, she'd thought. This exactly. Right here. She'd looked at the words in the book without reading them for a moment, and then Lily had looked up and said, "Is this word magnificent?" And she'd said yes. And Lily had beamed like she'd discovered treasure, and Mia had tucked the fear back down where she'd found it. But it was there. Waiting. One evening, driving home from a shift, her phone lit up on the passenger seat. She waited until she was stopped at a light, then glanced at it. A number she recognized. Trevor. She put the phone face down on the seat and drove the rest of the way home without looking at it. She didn't open the message for 2 days. She told herself this was fine. She told herself it was probably nothing, a misdirected text, some logistical leftover from a life they no longer shared. His snowblower was still technically in her storage unit. It was probably about that. It wasn't about that. Hey, I heard you're back in Aspen full-time. I'm moving up from Denver in April, took a position at the resort. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I hope you're good. She read it standing in her kitchen at 11 at night, still in her scrubs, too tired to have the feelings she could feel herself starting to have. She didn't respond. 2 days later, the hospital called about the head nurse position. She'd been approached about it before last October, and again in December, and both times she'd said she was interested but not ready. The unit director, a woman named Patricia, had been patient about it. Now Patricia was in her office doorway saying the position had to be filled by June, and did Mia want to have a real conversation about it? The job was more money, more responsibility, different hours, less bedside, more administrative. A career step she'd wanted for a long time. She told Patricia she'd think about it. On the drive home, she sat at a red light and thought about Trevor saying, "You've always cared more about being a good nurse than being a good girlfriend." The way he'd said it, not like an accusation, but like a diagnosis, like he was identifying the flaw. She'd carried that sentence for 2 years. She called Grace from the parking lot. "Trevor texted me," Grace said, very calmly. "Okay." And nothing. I didn't respond. "But I've been thinking about what he used to say, about how I couldn't balance things. Mia. He couldn't deal with you having a job that required you to actually show up. That's not the same as you being unable to balance things." "I know. Do you?" She looked out the windshield at the bare aspens, their pale trunks in the headlights. "I got offered head nurse." Silence. Then, "That's incredible. It means different hours, more responsibilities, possibly less." She stopped. "Less time with Daniel." She didn't answer. "Is that what's scaring you?" Grace asked. "Or are you using the job as a reason to be scared of something else?" Mia didn't answer that either. She texted Daniel that night. "Long day. Going to crash early." It was true, but it was also a withdrawal of a kind, and she knew it. He replied, "Rest, talk tomorrow." She lay in bed in the dark and thought about Lily saying "my Mia" and the way it had felt like sunlight and a door closing at the same time. Over the next 2 weeks, she pulled back incrementally. She canceled a Saturday visit, a double shift she hadn't expected. She kept her texts briefer, slower. She was still warm, still present, but she was doing the thing she'd learned to do when she was frightened. She was taking up less space, making herself lighter. Easier to lose. She wasn't sure Daniel didn't notice. He noticed. He was, she'd come to understand, a man who paid attention, not in the anxious, monitoring way of someone tracking whether he was winning or losing, in the way of someone who had learned that paying attention to people was how you loved them. So he noticed when she pulled back, and he let it be what it needed to be for a while. And then one evening, in early March, he called. She almost didn't pick up. The fact that she almost didn't made her pick up. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear ambient sound in the background, the soft noise of the house in the evening, maybe the TV in another room. "Are you okay?" The same question as the first night. She'd come to understand that it was his question, not filler, not formula, but his actual way in. She started. "I've been in my head." "I know," he said. She waited. "I'm not asking you to explain it," he said. "I just wanted to say something before I talked myself out of saying it." A pause. "I love you, Mia." The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. It was the silence of something enormous dropped into a still room. "Daniel, you don't have to say it back." His voice was steady, quiet, not wounded. Just honest. "I just needed you to know that. Whatever you're working through, whatever's happening in your head, this is where I am." She was standing in her kitchen, the same place she'd been when Trevor's text came in, and something about that made her aware of how different these two moments were. Trevor had never once said anything to her that was about what she needed to know. Everything had been about what he was owed. She opened her mouth and couldn't find the words. Not because she didn't have them, she did. She could feel them. But because saying them felt like stepping off something high, and she'd been standing at the edge of it so long that stepping was the hardest part. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Do what?" "Let someone in this far. I keep thinking I'm going to ruin it. I keep thinking." She stopped. Tried again. "I've been trained to fix things. At work, if something is wrong, there's a protocol. There's a clear thing to do." With this, she gestured at the air. "Uselessly, I don't know what to do when I'm scared except make myself smaller and hope it goes away." He was quiet on the other end. "It doesn't go away," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing." Same gentleness as the first night. "Just don't disappear. That's all I'm asking." She pressed the heel of her hand to her sternum, where the pressure had been living. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. She wanted to believe it. "Okay," he said. And then, softer, "Tell Lily she owes me an astronomy quiz answer." She went to bed early. Mia laughed, surprised by it. "Tell her I said hi." "I will." She stood in the kitchen for a long time after hanging up. She had not said it back. And the not saying felt like a small betrayal, not of him, but of herself. The head nurse offer came through official channels in the first week of April, and with it came something Mia hadn't entirely expected. A sister hospital in Vale was offering a position with even better benefits and more structural support. The hospital director in Vale, a woman named Dr. Hargrove, whom Mia had met at a conference 2 years ago, had personally reached out. Vale was 40 minutes away. Not Denver, not the end of the world. But 40 minutes from Aspen was 40 minutes from Daniel's house and Lily's school program, which was in 3 days, and something about the geography of it felt like a metaphor she couldn't stop examining. She took a day off and drove the 40 minutes to Vale and walked through the hospital and talked to the unit staff and looked at the office that would be hers if she said yes. It was a good office. It had windows. The staff seemed capable and overworked in the way of all ER staffs, and they needed leadership with clinical credibility, and she had that in abundance. She sat in the parking lot of the Vale Hospital and called Grace. "I'm thinking about taking it," she said. Grace was quiet. "It's a better position, more resources. I've wanted this kind of role for..." "What?" "You're about to walk away from the first genuinely healthy relationship you've had in your adult life because you're terrified of it." "That's not. I know you. I've known you for 11 years. You're not taking this job because it's better. You're taking it because it gives you a reason." Mia looked at the hospital entrance, watched a nurse wheel a patient out in a chair toward a waiting car. "I keep thinking," she said, "that if I stay and it falls apart..." "Lily." Grace said it softly. Mia closed her eyes. "You're not afraid of hurting Daniel," Grace said. "You're afraid of hurting Lily, because you already love her, and you don't know what to do with that." The thing about Grace was that she was almost always right, which was sometimes the most exhausting quality a friend could have. "I think I should take the job," Mia said. She didn't believe it completely when she said it. But she said it, and the saying of it felt like a decision being made. Or maybe the decision had already been made and she was just narrating it. She texted Daniel that evening. "Can I come over tomorrow? I need to talk to you." He replied, "Of course." Lily is at Cassandra's this week, which meant it would just be the two of them. And somehow that was harder than if Lily had been there, a small body to focus on, a reason to keep things together. She arrived in the early afternoon, while the light was still good. He met her at the door, and his face was already careful, he knew. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. They sat at the kitchen table. He made coffee she didn't drink. "I'm taking the position in Vale," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "When?" "June start. I'd still be in the valley. I'm not going far." "I know you're not going far." He turned his coffee cup. That's not the part you're trying to tell me. She looked at him. At the scar above his eyebrow. At the way his hands were still. I don't know how to be both things at once, she said. I don't know how to be the person who's right for you and be the nurse I need to be and not make someone pay the price for me trying to hold both. I've never asked you to choose. I know, but I've been here before. And the person I was with before said the same thing until he didn't. Daniel looked at her steadily. I'm not Trevor. I know. Do you? She didn't have an answer for that. Not one that felt honest. I think, she said carefully, that I am running. But I also think that I need to. I need to figure out if I can do this without making someone else carry my fear. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, light, late season, incongruous in April, but this was the mountains, and weather made its own decisions. The flakes came down unhurried against the window. I'll ask you something, he said, finally, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer. She waited. Are you leaving because you need to? Or are you leaving because staying is the scariest thing you've ever considered and it's easier to give it a reason? She looked at him across the kitchen table and felt the question land exactly where it was meant to land. She didn't answer. I'm not going to hold you here, he said. I don't do that. But I want you to know and really hear this: you're not going to protect us by leaving. You're going to end something that didn't need to end. She stood. She pulled her jacket off the back of the chair. At the door, she turned. He was still at the table, both hands around his cup. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. Don't disappear, he said. Like the first time. Whatever you decide, just don't disappear. She walked to her car through the April snow, and this time she didn't look in the mirror. She drove to Vale, and she drove back, and she worked her shifts, and she texted Daniel occasionally brief. Careful. The way you maintain something that doesn't know whether it's alive or finished, he replied. He always replied. He never pushed. She was in the break room 3 weeks later when Patricia mentioned, in passing, that the hospital was doing its spring fundraiser and that Lily Brooks had apparently organized a drawing table for the children's wing because her teacher had asked every class to contribute something. Mia looked up. Lily organized a drawing table? Patricia smiled. The teacher mentioned she wrote an actual letter to the hospital. Very official. Signed with her full name and a drawing of Jupiter. Mia sat with that. She went home. She sat on her couch in the apartment that felt too quiet, and she thought about Lily and Jupiter's moons and the purple rocket ship sweatshirt and my Mia. She thought about the snowman. She thought about the way Daniel had stood on his back porch watching his daughter build something in the snow, and the expression on his face that was quieter than happiness, deeper than contentment, a man who had survived hard things and hadn't become harder because of them. She thought about herself. She thought about the story she'd been telling herself, that she was the person who couldn't balance things, that she would inevitably ruin something if she stayed, that loving people too close was how you made casualties of them. She sat with that story for a long time. Then she thought about where the story came from. Trevor's voice, her mother's particular brand of anxious love that had taught her. In childhood, that attachment led to loss, and the only protection was preparedness for the end. She was a trauma nurse. She had literally learned that standing at the bedside of dying strangers and helping people survive the unsurvivable. She had also, apparently, internalized the belief that she herself was the emergency, that the people who loved her needed protecting from her proximity. She picked up her phone, not to text Daniel, to call Grace. I've been using the wrong framework, she said when Grace picked up. I've been waiting for this call, Grace said. I keep thinking I have to be completely healed before I'm safe to be around. Like I have to solve myself first. But that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. No, Grace said. It's not. I miss him, Mia said. Simple, plainly. I miss Lily. I miss being in that house. I miss the way he just listens. I miss being someone he's waiting for." She started crying then, which she hadn't expected, and it was the good kind of crying, the kind that was less falling apart and more clearing out something that had been held in for too long, releasing at once. She sat on her couch and let it happen. "Are you going to call him?" Grace asked. "No," Mia said, wiping her face. "I'm going to drive to Aspen." Grace made a sound. "Tonight? It's snowing again. It's always snowing. When are you leaving?" Mia was already standing. Now, the drive from Vale to Aspen took 47 minutes in clear weather. In late-season snow, it took closer to 70. She drove carefully, steadily, with both hands on the wheel and the heater running full. The road was white at the edges and dark in the middle where the plows had come through. Oncoming headlights came at intervals through the falling snow, briefly illuminating the interior of the car, briefly making her visible. She had always been good in emergencies. She'd been told this so many times it had become a kind of identity, a thing she held on to when other things were uncertain. You are the person who does not freeze. In the ER, when the room filled with urgency, she became more herself, not less, more focused, more clear. The noise of panic in other people somehow organized her own thinking. She had not been good, she understood now, at the emergencies that looked like ordinary life. The slow ones, the ones that weren't sirens and adrenaline but were just two people in a kitchen, one of them unable to say the word stay. She thought about the first night, the restaurant, the snow, the blood-stained scrubs, the way every person in that dining room had looked at her like she'd arrived from some other category of existence, and Daniel pulling out a chair, asking if she was okay, not performing patience, not managing her, just treating her like someone worth waiting for. She thought she might have been waiting for that her whole adult life without knowing it had a shape. She pulled onto Daniel's street at 10:15. The lights were still on. She sat in the car for 3 breaths, not composing herself, just being there, being present for a second before the next thing. Then she got out. He answered the door before she knocked. He'd heard the car. He looked at her. Her coat was dusted with snow. Her eyes were a little red from the drive, or maybe from something else. She said, "I love you." She said, "I know I'm late, and I didn't say it when you said it, and that wasn't fair. But I love you, and I'm not scared of the job or the distance. I'm scared of how much I love Lily. I'm scared of how much I want this to be mine. And I've been using that fear as a reason to run instead of a reason to stay." He was quiet. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. He crossed the porch and put his arms around her. No drama, no performance. Just the weight of him, solid and steady, and the cold air around them and the snow still falling. "Okay," he said, quietly. "Then we figure it out." She pressed her face against his shoulder. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. And they stood there in the April snow, in front of the house with the boots on the step and the bird feeder and the child's drawing in the window. And Mia thought, this is not the absence of fear. This is choosing something bigger than fear. That, she had learned, was the only courage that counted. She took the head nurse position. In Aspen, not Vale, Patricia had kept it open longer than she'd needed to. Because Patricia, it turned out, had known Mia long enough to have faith in certain outcomes even when Mia herself didn't. The job was hard in the ways she'd expected and rewarding in ways she hadn't. More administrative, yes, more meetings, more staffing decisions, more of the work that happened in offices instead of at bedsides. But also more ability to shape the environment her people worked in. More capacity to change the small things that made big differences. The scheduling that had been grinding people down, the lack of adequate support staff during overnight surges, the culture of silence around burnout that had been quietly breaking nurses for years. She was good at it. She'd known she would be, but there's a difference between knowing something and doing it. She kept her apartment. Daniel kept his house. This was a deliberate choice. Arrived at together, they were building something, not rushing it. She spent weekends there. Lily had her own way of charting time now that included Mia. School days, dad days, and what she called Mia and Dad days, which were objectively the best days according to Lily, and which Lily had no interest in underreporting. Lily's school program had been The Moon in a play about the solar system, and she had delivered her 3 lines with a solemnity that suggested she understood the moon's historical significance. Mia had sat in the 3rd row with Daniel and watched. And when Lily squinted against the stage lights and found them in the audience, her face had opened in a way that was exactly like sunlight. They had dinner together on Sundays. They built things. The bird feeder Lily had decided needed a 2nd story. The raised garden beds Daniel was putting in for the spring, the puzzle of 1,000 pieces of the night sky that Lily had requested and that all 3 of them had been working on in installments since February. Jupiter's moons were currently missing, and this was a source of ongoing diplomatic tension. The ex-Trevor had moved to Aspen. They'd encountered each other once, briefly, outside the grocery store in June. He'd looked at her and she'd looked at him, and something that had been a bruise for 2 years had simply not hurt, like pressing on a place that used to be sore and finding it healed. She'd told Daniel about it that evening. "What did you feel?" he asked. "Nothing, mostly," she said. "A little sad." He'd nodded. He understood things like that, how you could grieve time without grieving the person you'd spent it with. The wedding was a small thing, planned and unplanned in equal measure. They'd gotten engaged in November, at the kitchen table where they'd been working on the puzzle, and it had been less a dramatic moment than an acknowledgement of a thing that had already been decided. Lily had asked, with complete seriousness, why Mia didn't just live there all the time. And after Daniel and Mia had looked at each other for approximately 2 seconds, the question had answered itself. The ceremony was in January, which was the right choice because this story had always been a winter story, because the best things in Mia's life had happened in the cold. There were 30 people. Grace flew in from Denver and stood next to Mia at the front. Lily wore a white dress with stars on the hem and held the rings in a small velvet pouch that she'd chosen herself. And when the officiant asked who supported this union, she said, "Me," without waiting for the usual prompt, which got the only laugh of the day, and also, somehow, the most applause. The reception was dinner at the Ember table. The snow was falling outside the same windows it had fallen past on a night nearly 2 years before, when a woman had walked in 40 minutes late in blood-stained scrubs and been offered a chair instead of a judgment. Mia stood at the window at the end of the evening and watched the snow. She felt, at the base of her chest where the pressure had lived for so long, something that was not the absence of weight, but was the right kind of weight. The weight of things that were real and chosen, and hers. Daniel came to stand beside her. Lily was at the kids' table across the room, fully asleep in her chair, somehow upright, the velvet pouch still clutched in one hand. "She's going to be devastated she missed the end," Mia said. "She'll claim she saw all the important parts." She did, actually. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him. Outside, the snow kept falling, patient and consistent, the way snow always was, indifferent to timing, indifferent to narrative, covering everything equally in white. Mia had spent a long time believing that she had to choose. Between the work and the love, between who she was and who she was becoming, between the part of her that stayed and the part of her that ran, what she'd learned, slowly and not without difficulty, was that the choice had never been the work versus the love. The choice had been, do I believe I deserve to stay? She stayed. That was the whole story, really, but it was enough. She was 36 years old, and she was a head nurse who was good at her job, and she was a wife, and she was the person Lily consulted about medical questions and moon phases, and whether jellyfish had feelings she did not know, but they looked it up together, and none of these things had required her to be smaller. Not one. The fear never entirely went away. That was the other thing she'd learned. It didn't vanish. It just stopped being the loudest thing in the room. It was still there sometimes on the hard nights, when work followed her home, when she was too tired to be patient, when she wondered whether she was enough of all the things she needed to be. She still, occasionally, started sentences with "I'm sorry" when she hadn't done anything wrong. But Daniel would catch her eye when she did that, a small look, patient and specific, and she'd hear herself. And stop, and begin again. The snow kept falling. It always kept falling, here. She had stopped fighting that.